Hey, everybody, welcome to the MOSAS podcast, the musicians of the San Antonio Symphony. We are currently on strike on day 30 against symphony management due to unfair labor practices. I'm your host, Steve Peterson. I'm principal trombone with the symphony when we're playing, and I'm handling all media during the strike. So we have a big event coming up this Friday, October 29th, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. We're doing a rally in Veterans Memorial Park, and we're going to have some great guest speakers and some performances by symphony players, so be sure to show up for that and show your support for the symphony. Today, I talked to Mary Ellen Goree, who is the second principal violin, which is the leader of the second violin section. In a symphony, you have violin 1 and violin 2, and she's sort of the leader of violin 2, and she's also a very important figure right now because she's the chair of our negotiating, or we can also call it the musician committee. A musician committee is the leadership representatives of essentially the musicians handling any sort of housekeeping issues and also functioning as a negotiating committee when negotiating happens for new contracts with management. Generally, contracts with orchestras last for anywhere from 2 years to 4 years, maybe longer. It just depends on the organization. And so the musician committee ends up being very instrumental in sitting down with management, and that's sort of what led us to this strike is how that went down. So I talked to her about that process a bit, and she's obviously very, very busy right now, so I really appreciate her sitting down with me and talking a bit about her challenges and our collective challenges right now. And we also talked a little bit about tone, how we're sort of handling our messaging and just not being afraid to say the truth, essentially. So I'm always expressing a concern that, do we need to approach this subject a certain way? And it really just is approaching it by presenting the truth. And that's sort of what we arrived at. And you really can't go wrong with telling the truth, I would hope. So let's join that conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Have you done this position, committee chair of the Musicians Committee before?
I've been chair of the Musicians Committee for a total of many years, over several terms, but I've never been through anything like this right now.
Because on normal circumstances, there's always a musicians committee. So there's what would be a normal, obviously you have the time when we're doing negotiating. So that can be kind of troubling. And that's obviously what you were participating in. And this whole thing with the strike is a whole nother can of worms. But under normal circumstances, it's like what kind of issues? It's like what kinds of things are we dealing with?
Well, a conductor wants to change the rehearsal order at the last minute, and so we have to conduct a vote on stage. Or maybe a musician is having a concern with management, and so we will represent that musician. I need to point out that I did not actually sign up to do any negotiating. My term on the orchestra committee was supposed to be the second and third. Well, maybe I did sign up for negotiating, but I certainly didn't sign up for this.
So when did you first start on the committee, serving as chair of this musicians committee for this kind of go around?
I think it was last season. I honestly don't remember.
Mm-hmm. And so you kind of stayed on because we were kind of in need, like through the summer when these because the negotiating started happening right around early summer, even before then, right?
My term was set to end this past September, but it's in our bylaws that if you're on the committee and you're in the middle of negotiating, that you just remain on the committee until the negotiations have concluded, which is a logical thing because it keeps continuity.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you can walk through, we've kind of aired out like most of the details of what's happened kind of through your appearances, and a lot of what you're doing right now is appearances in the local press, giving quotes and things like that. So talking about kind of what happened during negotiating. So kind of walk us through, when you sit down, first of all, who's there, and then kind of what transpires.
Well, we have a negotiating committee on our side, which is comprised of the orchestra committee and representatives from Local 23. And of course, the president of Local 23 is also on that committee. and we have an attorney who represents us. That's David Van Oss. The other side is representatives of the board and the management. It's Corey Cowart, our executive director, and Kathleen Vale, the chair of the board of directors. And there have been, I think, 3 other board members have been present at these sessions, and at least 1 other member of management.
Now, how do they volunteer? Which board members will participate in that? They just kind of say, I'll do it, and then...
I don't know.
Okay. Just curious how they handle that. So essentially 5 to 6 people on either side, if you want to call them.
No, we have about 10 people on our side.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because with the attorney, all the different union representatives, the entire negotiating committee is there generally, ideally, right? So it's 6... How many people do we have? 6?
Well, at the moment, we have 1 vacancy on the orchestra committee, so we have 4 orchestra committee people, and we have, I think, 5 representatives from Local 23, 3 of whom are actually members of the orchestra themselves.
Mm-hmm. So you sit down. What's the first thing that happens? Do they come with? Well, let's just talk about. Perhaps we could talk about this as in an isolated way, how it does usually work, or what actually transpired. Probably better to talk about that, as long as there's no problems, because a lot of this went out in the press already, right? So, do they come with a deal first, or do you guys kind of have like a preemptive deal, like this is what we'd like? Or
well, nothing about this is normal, nothing. And this is an outgrowth of the agreement we reached last season due to the pandemic. We had negotiated a memorandum of agreement, which was ratified in the summer of 2020, which contained provisions that drastically altered the second season, as you remember. That was the 2020-2021 season that was so drastically altered. But at the time we negotiated that, there was no vaccine, there was no real knowledge of when the pandemic might ease up or what things would be like in a year. And so it seemed prudent and reasonable to have a clause in that memorandum of agreement that specifically allowed either side to request to reopen the 3rd year of the contract due to pandemic uncertainties if they requested to do so by January 15th. And our management did make that request. We have since learned that the basis for their desire to reopen the 3rd year of the contract has little to nothing to do with the pandemic, so they actually violated the terms of the agreement we had reached. And but nevertheless, we met with them quite a few times over the course of the spring and the summer. You ask if, like, both sides come up with something. Well, there's a big difference between the natural expiration of a 3-year collective bargaining agreement when you are negotiating for a new collective bargaining agreement and what we're dealing with right now, which is we have an existing collective bargaining agreement. It goes through this season. It does not expire till August 31st, 2022. So the request to reopen the 3rd year came from management, and the proposals that contained the most drastic changes came from management. From the musician's perspective, our starting point was the 3rd year of the CBA.
Mm-hmm. So just to reiterate, so the COVID year for us was in the fall of, 2020? We were doing nothing really as far as performing. And then we had kind of a mini season between February to June. And, and from my perspective, I think I did like 2 concerts because it was we were trying to reduce the amount of people on stage.
Right.
So it was a lot of early classical kind of rep. So not a lot of use for a trombone player there. I did Beethoven 6 and a couple other things. So yeah, limited season. It was good that we'd had that. So the provisions that they put in place for that, you're saying they used kind of in an inappropriate way and even extending because, well, can you explain kind of, you kind of touched on it, but let's explain sort of what they were using to justify sort of the cuts or the proposals that they were making in, I guess it would be 2021 summer, early spring.
Well, the clause that they invoked to request to reopen specifically tied the ability to request the reopener to the pandemic. And their own words, even in the most recent Express News article, but you can find many quotes in the press right now in which they admit that there are longstanding financial issues, and that this is their attempt in their minds, or at least what they're saying, is to solve these longstanding financial issues. So they're making our case for us.
Right. It was really saying that the pandemic itself was not the big issue here. It was actually just that we were running into, right when things closed down, March of 2020, right? Let me get my dates correct. And when everything closed down, we were actually in trouble as far as our budgets, right?
Well, I would say that we are in trouble, have been in trouble due to this limited vision of fundraising.
Yeah, for many decades, really.
Well, yeah, and as a matter of fact, the pandemic, while it really hurt people like you and me, the people that are likely to be in our more generous donor end of the pool, the stock market has done extremely well. And I don't think that you can make a blanket statement that everybody's been hurt by the pandemic. So I reject that as an argument. And I think that to say that our budget was in trouble, I think it's more accurate to say that our fundraising has long been of limited vision and not with the breadth that I would like to see. I have noted that San Antonio, we had 20% growth over the last 10 years. We're a city of, 2.5 million now, or 2.2 million, something like that. And you can draw lines on a graph. The bigger the city has gotten, the smaller the symphony budget has gotten. Even after the pandemic, the bankruptcy in 2003, when we came back in 2004, the budget at that time, if you convert it to 2021 dollars, was equivalent to about $8 million now.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I really want to do. I need to get a sheet adjusted by inflation, I think by next couple podcasts, to kind of show the evolution of what we've been making. So going back to sort of sitting down at the table, obviously I went, last podcast we talked a lot about sort of, their ineptitude to fundraise. And this goes, back other administrations, other boards and so forth. So it's been a problem that's inherited for some reason. It's a sort of a culture, and we're kind of looking to break that culture of sort of doing better at fundraising, right? So, when you're sitting down at the table, they really just, what were some of the initial offers? Because I think we publicized a bit of this, but early on, what were some of the things they were coming up with?
Well, I think their first proposal was a $17,000 base salary for all 72 musicians, and if we didn't like that and felt that was unacceptably low, we could choose to go with a smaller orchestra and a slightly higher wage. I don't consider anything that involves reducing the orchestra below 72 musicians to be worth discussing. That was never acceptable. And their idea, what they told us, was that they only could raise $4.5 million for this coming season. Sorry.
Yeah, let me just do a quick lower this.
I'm starting to feel your cat.
Oh no.
So
Kitty.
So they said, when they said they could only raise $4.5 million this season, and so that was the only level of budget that they were willing to consider. First of all, that's bargaining in bad faith, because they started out with an end point in mind. And secondly, even their own history, I believe over the last 3 years, they raised $8 million, $7.5 million, and then I think in the year, it might have included the pandemic year, it was $6 million. They've never had a year in which they had such a limited amount of fundraising.
Now, yeah, one thing I wanted to cover is the discussions that were happening. I think you had asked something about fundraising. You were asking, and you even, I think we had talked, or I'd heard through the grapevine that you were asking, what can musicians do, or what can we do to help fundraise with you? Was that true? So that was a discussion that you had with management at that time?
Well, that was contained in our last proposal. The last proposal the musicians offered before everything blew up was a proposal that contained a 17% pay cut in the base wage and called for a joint management musician fundraising initiative. That was in our proposal, and we also explicitly said that everything in that proposal was negotiable, and they dismissed it out of hand. Speaking for myself personally, I have made the offer over at least the last 10 years, and I know of several other colleagues who have done the same. Made the offer, take us along on donor calls. I would love to go along on donor calls and make the case for the San Antonio Symphony for it being a public good, for it being an essential part of what makes the city of San Antonio great. It's a part of the economic, it's a big piece of the economic pie. It's an important part of the educational infrastructure. We're part of the quality of life. We teach the children of San Antonio. We're there for people's important celebrations. When we have a concert, people come downtown, they pay for parking, they go out for dinner, maybe they go out afterwards. If you look at the faculty of the local colleges and universities, the symphony is well represented on that. And what the case I would like to make is that even those people who do not attend symphony concerts benefit from our presence in the community. We're part of the quality of life, which is what corporations look at when they're deciding where to relocate. If they want to move their employees somewhere, people want to know, is there a symphony? We are part of the educational infrastructure. We play for 50,000 students a year from all walks of life, all corners of San Antonio, public schools, private schools, parochial schools, home schools, charter schools, the rich districts, the poor districts. We play for them all. And we've heard from so many children who write us at the time or later on as adults to tell us how much those concerts meant to them. And so we're really a part of what makes San Antonio great. And I think that case can be made to more corporations, more foundations, more individuals, inviting them to be a part of our success. And that is what I would have done if I had ever been taken up on my offer.
Let me just try like that. So the puzz. So what I was curious about, so you kind of point blank asked them in these negotiating meetings, what are you doing for fundraising? Or it was like the two questions I thought that perhaps transpired. What are you doing, or what can we do to help, right? Which you're kind of covering. But did they ever discuss, or is that just would that be not relevant in their mind when they're trying to come up with a good contract?
The only thing, well, they were never trying to come up with a good contract, but the only thing that they told us about fundraising was that...
Kitty is returned. Let me get rid of him. Oh, I should lock him out of the kitty door. No. Ugh.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if it's helpful or not. I don't know if we covered. I think we mentioned that you're deaf. Are you allergic to dogs too?
No, I'm not. I actually have a dog.
Oh, okay. I don't know what it is about the cat dander. It just gets some people. So, so we were saying, did they ever discuss what they were doing? And because it didn't seem like they were reaching out to anybody or.
Well, what they told us was that they were only counting the donations from people who were already existing donors. That was all they were willing to consider. And they were also projecting only $90,000 in corporate grants, which is just, I'm ashamed for them, honestly. That's so low.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, were you, how long have you been in the symphony here?
Since 1988.
Okay, so did you just miss the strike that happened then?
The strike was in 1985, and there was a lockout in 1987, and when I won the job and was getting ready to move to San Antonio, all my friends thought I was crazy.
Well, do you know anything about what and I think I'm going to have perhaps Judy or somebody that was here. Who else would have been
Allison.
here? Oh, Allison, yeah, so she could speak to that. But What was the issue initially? I mean, it was just your standard cut, and do you know the nature of that cut, perhaps?
You would really need to talk to somebody who was here.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to cover that later because I feel like that would be a good perspective. So kind of what is your day-to-day right now? What kinds of things? I mean, first of all, how many kids are you teaching right now? You're teaching violin.
Yeah, I haven't counted it up. It's probably around 20.
Okay, 21 hours.
Not all of them. Some of them are a little bit shorter, but it's a lot of teaching.
And that's a little bit more than you normally do?
No, I have been teaching at that level or more ever since the bankruptcy in 2003.
Okay, yeah, it's probably good to have lots of irons in the fire, as certainly I do that. So as far as your duties, obviously planning events, what is the negotiating committee or the musician committee kind of handling right now? What kinds of things?
Well, the biggest thing
Nope.
I'm sorry.
It's the kitty.
The biggest thing we're working on right now is the rally.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and let's talk about that. So I'm going to make a little announcement at the top, which means they would have already heard it. But it's October 29th. What is it?
6:30 p.m.
to 8, around 8, and we have some special guest speakers happening. Terry Castillo, a whole list of people. Ray Hare from the AFM, American Federation of Musicians, is going to be speaking. So kind of a cool thing. And it's not just going to be us holding signs and shouting. I mean, it's going to be an event. We're going to have performances.
Yes.
We're kind of working out who's going to play. And so, yeah, it's going to be hopefully a really good time. So we're working on that, and we're racking our brains to kind of come up with different, unique ways of reaching out to the community. So just kind of comparing this to other strikes that you've seen. I mean, how do you, I don't know, there's really no information that we would have to predict how long this is going to go, but what is your thought on that? Because I'm going to get perspectives from people in Fort Worth talking about, what leading indicators led them, to come out of that strike, and perhaps even have some people from Minnesota and really any number of groups. But what do you think it's going to take, from the community, from us to get us out of this?
Well, I do need to point out this is my first strike.
Yeah, mine too.
I've had a 36-year career so far, and this is my first strike. I can't predict how long the strike will go on. The strike will go on as long as necessary. We have an objective in mind. The objective is to preserve the San Antonio Symphony Orchestra. The objective is to achieve a fair contract for the musicians, one that will allow us to return to the stage and will also not guarantee the demise of the orchestra. Also will not take away health insurance from 40% of the orchestra in the middle of a pandemic. How long that's going to take, I don't know. As long as necessary, I guess.
Yeah, and I was just talking with someone about this, about our healthcare possibly, correct me if I'm wrong, possibly expiring in a few days?
Well, what I understand, and I am not a lawyer, but what I understand is that they are bound by the terms which they imposed. And by the terms which they imposed, all of the supposed B contract players, a designation which we reject, but that's part of their terms, their health insurance will end at midnight on October 31st. But by their own terms, they are supposed to continue health insurance for the A contract players. Again, a term I reject. But those are their terms. Now, what they actually do, I don't control, and I have no insight into. I can only tell you that federal laws and that sort of thing are not always observed. In the past, in 2003, when they declared bankruptcy and they canceled the 03-04 season, I have a very clear memory of getting a letter in the mail, and my mail came late in the day, so this was like 5 p.m. on October 1st, informing me that as of midnight, September 30th, my health insurance was terminated.
Was that resolved, or it actually did expire during that bankruptcy? It just expired and there was no extension or anything?
They terminated it, and we had bigger fires to put out than filing a suit over that particular violation.
Sure, bigger fish to fry. So It's possible that our healthcare or some of our healthcare could be canceled, but this is something we really need to communicate with them. And obviously, there's not a lot of communication.
Well, no, I mean, one of our colleagues did ask and was told by a representative of the management that was in the hands of the orchestra committee, which is actually completely false and shows a very deep misunderstanding of the situation.
Yeah, how would the musician committee have any control over that? That's very strange.
Well, I think what they meant was that we could end the strike.
Yeah, if you merely end the strike, then you'll have your health care.
Well, they don't understand it. I got an email from Corey Cowart a couple of weeks ago inquiring if it was the musicians' intent to end the strike by the next Sunday, because he needed to know in order to decide whether to cancel concerts, which just boggled my mind, because why would we end a strike when we're not remotely close to achieving any of the objectives that the strike is for?
Yeah, I think it's important to make this really clear that none of us that I'm aware of have any intention of ending this strike and accepting this deal. I think that I would hope that would be fairly clear. Well, is that not clear?
Well, apparently it isn't clear. I want to make a couple of really strong points based on what you just said. It is not for the musicians to decide to end the strike. It is for an agreement to be reached that would remove the necessity for the strike. That's number one. And number two, the ball is not in the musicians' court right now. They gave us this completely intolerable proposal, chopping up the orchestra, and requested that we bring it to the musicians for a vote, which we did. And the musicians unanimously rejected that proposal. So their response to that was to declare impasse and impose the terms of the proposal, which had been unanimously rejected, to which we called a strike. So if you're following the tennis match here, the ball is in their court. And I understand through the grapevine that they seem to be waiting for the musicians to come to them with another proposal, which I have said to them and I have said to the media, we can't talk about a proposal until you withdraw this. Remove your last, best, and final offer and withdraw the imposed terms. Because the phrase last, best, and final, you have just slammed the door. You have made it very clear. You have nothing more to say. You have no interest in hearing what we have to say. How are we supposed to how could any reasonable person expect us to come up with a proposal while this last, best, and final offer is imposed?
Yeah, and it's I don't know if we ever made this clear in our social media, or maybe it was in some of the articles, but let's just say it again. That's actually what the document said when we all got an email from Corey Cowart, the executive director. Last best offer, right? Something
last, best, and final.
Yeah, and final.
That was their title.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, to your point, I mean, yes. So they're waiting. Is it just that they wanted to scare us with that title? I mean, if is it in our ability to just ignore that titling of that document and just present another document saying we want this?
Why would we do that?
Exactly, and why would they say that that's what they're waiting for us to do when they put a title of last best?
Well,
like you said, they shut the door.
And final. Words have meanings.
Yeah.
And they used those words. They are the ones who chose to use those words. They are the only ones who can retract those words. We did give them a proposal. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the musicians are concerned, our proposal is still on the table. It contained a 17% cut, and I don't know in what world a 17% cut would not be considered a significant concession. It contained a call for a joint fundraising effort, and it explicitly said that everything in it was negotiable.
Okay, so the only way, when we talked about a lot of this with Marty last podcast about creating a false narrative of that we have to live within our means and that there's no possible way that we can do this, which is, I believe, untrue, especially when you were saying that the size of this city, how much better it's doing, it's growing. I mean, Texas in general has been booming, ever since I started living here. Real estate prices, and that's across the board. But just Texas in general, the economies, and San Antonio, I mean, I've seen in the 5 years I've been here how much it's grown in the different areas, how many houses they're building, how many new companies, even around the Tobin Center, it's gone from like a weird kind of industrial zoning, and now they're starting to add like high-rise apartment buildings. So there's a certain amount of wealth that is to be mined, and it's just up to, you know, an organization that's savvy to find that wealth, you know, without going over the same points that we were talking about.
Well, I want to take issue with one word you just used. You said wealth to be mined. I really want to take issue with this. I think that it isn't a question of siphoning off anything. It is a question of offering every part of our community the opportunity to be part of the San Antonio Symphony success. They are already benefiting from our presence. I think it's only fair for people to be part of the success that they're already benefiting from. But I would never characterize it that way.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. Words do have meaning in this case, that there is a mutual benefit that we can offer. So it's not like the money is just being, well, yeah, we're just, you know, give us money and there's nothing. It's nothing to do with that. It's really, and it's an investment in their own community. That's
exactly it. It is an investment in their own community. Thank you for that. That's very good.
We'll strike the other wording. So I believe, you know, a lot of the things that have been going on in my head is that, and we had a meeting with some of the AFM people talking about this, that, you know, it's not our job as musicians to do management's job, which is true to some extent. However, I feel like, you know, we're doing a pretty good job of communicating, and we'll get better and better with the mass public. And there's going to be a lot of wonderful things that we can do if we keep kind of, we're just speaking honestly here. We're trying to create a dialogue and create, you know, more relationships with people in the community that, you know, and just, you know, let people know we're here, essentially, and that this is a great product and a great, you know, as we said, something for the community. So I feel like in a way, throughout this process, you know, maybe I'm not supposed to characterize it this way, but I feel like we will be doing a lot of the things that management is not doing. We're going to be reaching out possibly to the community to figure out how to get through this, because I don't feel like they are going to do anything.
I don't think they're going to do anything until they are publicly shamed to the point where they have to do it.
I'd imagine they're probably approaching it as a cold business decision. They're just saying, well, this is the budget. And they're probably not thinking about how it affects people's lives, which is not good, because, you know, their decision is incorrect. I mean, there's ways of encouraging the community to contribute to itself by contributing to the symphony. So it's, you know, everything you say is correct. I'm always just trying to figure out what the right approach to this is, because I'm a trombone player. There it is. Not because there's anything, as in like that's what I focus on. I do video, I do trombone. You know, as far as the right approach to go about this, I think just going to tell the truth. I think that's just what it comes down to, as far as like when we were talking about how do we put stuff out on social, how do we do this, how do we present our message. Just tell the truth, and of course everyone would agree with that. You know, talk about how this has affected our lives, why it's an incorrect decision. You know, whether they want to feel shame, that's up to them. You know, I don't need them to feel shame. I just need them to make the right decision, right? That's the idea here. So, you know, I think this needs to remain civil, of course. But, you know, the more and more people that we can, and we already put a post on Eric Sue put a post on Facebook about, you know, to contact, you know, certain management members and let them know. I would hopefully say politely, I don't want them to be harassed. I don't know. What do you think about it?
Well, some people copy me on the emails they send, and every email I have seen has been intelligent and courteous. I can't control how everybody thinks or behaves on either side of the divide. And I'm not really a person who is given to spin. I'm a person who tells the truth. And I'm telling the truth. And I'm telling it on Facebook, and I'm saying the truth in emails when I have to respond to a query from management. I tell the truth when members of the public ask me. And the truth is, you referred to this as an incorrect decision. I would characterize it as a harmful, destructive decision. The truth is that if they care at all about having any kind of a professional orchestra in San Antonio, they will back off of this idea, because it is 100% guaranteed that they will not only not get what they want, they will not have an orchestra at all.
So if there's, as you say, a harmful and what was the other word?
Destructive.
Destructive, right? Harmful and destructive decision that they're making here, which it is, I agree, then we can say that. Getting into legality, I don't know how that works with, I think you could prove that it does destroy someone's savings, their ability to make money, to support their families.
Well, it does all that, but more to the point from the perspective of the board. It destroys the orchestra, and I would love to take a couple minutes and explain that, because I think this is very important. If they succeed in their imposition of this destructive, dividing the orchestra, first of all, there will be 26 colleagues of yours and mine, all of whom took the same audition process you and I did, all of whom have learned their instruments to a very high level, honed their craft, gone to the best schools, same as you, same as me. And those 26 people will lose their health insurance, lose their benefits, and see their salary slashed by 2/3 to just over $11,000. Now, how many of those colleagues do you think are going to stick around? I think not very many. And I think anybody who can leave will leave, which is most of them. And they will move to other cities, take jobs in other orchestras. They could go back to their home city and make more money than that teaching and freelancing. So they will leave. And how will we replace them? Nobody is going to come take an audition for no benefits and $11,000 a year with a management that has already proven it's disloyal. So we will not be able to replace these extremely highly qualified artistic colleagues with musicians at that level, because they won't come. So that's the 26. Now let's talk about the 42-member core. I hate even talking about this, because I don't want to even give the idea that I take this seriously. I do not take this seriously. This proposal, we will not ever agree to it. Among the people who would supposedly comprise the core, by doing it by seniority, there are quite a few people in it who are either at retirement age already or very close to it. There are also other people, I've heard from several other colleagues who are saying the same thing I am saying, which is, if this were to ever be imposed, which it won't be, but if it were ever to be imposed, I will resign. I cannot stay on stage in the knowledge that my seat was retained at the expense of 26 of my equally deserving, artistically gifted, and hardworking colleagues. It's a moral issue. Now, how do you think they're going to replace the people who are either going to retire or perhaps win another audition or resign on principle? How are they going to replace those people? They're not. Nobody will come to San Antonio to audition for a $24,000 a year job with a management that has a proven track record of disloyalty.
What gives you hope with any of this? What is kind of, obviously this is a difficult time for us as a group. What is giving you hope right now, just in your personal life, or just about your colleagues or what have you?
The remarkable unity I have seen among our colleagues, the enthusiasm. I think this is an all-hands-on-deck situation, and I'm encouraged by the unity we're seeing.
And I am too. And the weird thing I said, I don't know if I left this in with a conversation with Marty, but when I was on the phone with him, and this is the contrabassoonist that was on the last podcast, yeah, just for anyone. And I said to him, you want to be on this podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure, we can talk about, how symphony structures, etc. And I said, I know that we're in a strike and it's not ideal, but I'm kind of excited to do this podcast. And it's not that I'm excited that the conditions are in place, but just the ability to do something and just to be active and vocal in this whole experience is, I don't want to say enjoyable, but the feeling of camaraderie that you're touching on, and the fact that we can just speak honestly and talk about like our lives and this organization and where it can go and where it should be. So that's exciting for me. So anyway, I think that's a good place to leave it. I don't know. What other things are rolling around in your head as far as this?
www.mosas.org. MOSAS.org.
Yeah, that's a great place. And there they can find an address to donate. and just get any of the updates that we have, and we're going to be blasting that out. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. Should we do a little bump? We did it, yes. Well done. Thank you for being here. Sorry about Kitty, being allergic to Kitty.
Sorry.
Hey everyone, one more quick thing. Oh, I have to be able to hear myself. Boomy voice. Oh, yes, much better. For questions, comments about the podcast, email mosaspodcast@gmail, MOSAS podcast@gmail.com. And for all things, updates, so forth, as we said already, go to mosas.org. Thanks.